Hello everyone, welcome to another Procreate tutorial. This is the drawing that we will be completing in today's video. If you are new here, I mainly post Procreate tutorials, so if that is something you're interested, go ahead and subscribe. Otherwise, before we get started, the only thing that you will need to download is the color palette. I have it linked in the description below. It is totally free to download. Just open up the file and it'll import the color palette into Procreate so that you can use the same colors that I am throughout the video. Other than that, all the brushes that we will be using are standard Procreate brushes, so no downloading to do there. So go grab that color palette and then come back and we will get started. First things first, we'll go over the canvas dimensions here. I have them set to 10 inches by 10 inches at 300 dpi, and the color profile is the second RGB color profile on the RGB list. And then here is the color palette that we'll be using. Top row is the bottle and the cork, the second row is the water, and then the third row is all the octopus colors, which look very strange, but they'll look normal under the water. So first things first, grab this first color on the first row, and then go into your brushes and select the monoline brush. We have it at 100%, as big as we can get it, and we are just going to draw a circle on layer 1. Hold your pen down so that it snaps into a shape, and then touch your finger on the screen to make it a perfect circle, and then resize it a little bit. We don't want it to be too big. We need room for a shadow underneath, and we need room for the cork on top. Then click the arrow tool, make sure that snapping is turned on in the bottom left, and make sure that the circle is perfectly in the center of the screen when you see the yellow lines. And then while on that same layer with the circle, we are going to click the gear icon here under canvas, turn on the drawing guide, click edit drawing guide, and click on symmetry on the far right, and then make sure it is vertical. So go into the options there and click vertical if it is not, and then click done. And we are going to make sure that layer says assisted on it. If not, click on it and turn on drawing assist. And then grab the eraser. I usually just use the hard airbrush eraser for everything, and we want it at about 30% or so. But we are going to erase just a small section at the very top of the circle. Hold your pen down the first time so that you get a perfectly straight up and down line, and then erase the rest of it. Grab the pen tool, same settings as before, and draw a line. Hold your pen down on the screen to make it turn into a perfectly straight line that's slanted a little outwards where that opening is, and then draw a line across the middle. Touch your finger on the screen to make sure it's perfectly horizontal and connects in the middle. And in the layers menu, add a new layer, turn on drawing assist, and then in the color palette, grab the second color on the first row there. And then actually back in the layers menu, we're going to drag this layer below the bottle shape layer that we just made. And using that same pen, we are going to draw a line right underneath the opening of the bottle. Kind of make this slant the same as that opening that we created there, but a little inside it. Make sure not to go outside the shape on the sides. And then draw a line across the top. Touch your finger to the screen to make it horizontal. And then do the same thing on the bottom so that you have this trapezoid-like shape. Again, make sure that none of it is sticking out on the sides of the bottle, just on the top. And then fill it in. Next, go into the layers menu. Let's go ahead and just turn off drawing assist for both of these layers. And then select both of them by sliding left on them, and then use the arrow tool. And let's just turn the shape to the right just a little bit. If your bottle is going to stick out of the top, drag it down a little, make sure it's kind of centered on the screen. Then back in the layers menu, let's add a new layer on top of the cork and click on it, click on clipping mask, go into the color palette and select this third color on the first row. And then with our brush, we are actually going to go into the charcoals and use the very first one to the charcoal at about 25 to 30%. And we're just going to lightly shade the top left section of this cork. Go back to the color palette, select the fourth color on the top row, and do the same thing on the opposite side of the cork to give it a little bit of a shadow. Okay, and then let's go back into the layers menu, add a new layer on top of this one. Don't turn it into a clipping mask though. Grab the same color that we were just using, the fourth one on the top row, and then go back to our monoline brush. And we're going to change the size down to about 40 to 50. And we are going to draw some little holes on the cork here. Some of them will make a perfect circle. Otherwise, just hold your pen down so that they get a nice circular shape. But they don't have to be a perfect circle, all of them. And then fill them each in as we go. I'm just going to do a few different ones of different sizes. Okay, and then go back into our layers menu, add a new layer on top of this one, turn it into a clipping mask, grab the last color on the last row, and go back to our 2B charcoal, same size and everything, and we're just going to lightly shade the bottom parts of all these little holes just to give them a little bit more depth. Okay, and then to keep everything organized, let's go into our layers menu and select those 4 layers that make up the cork, and click on group. And then click the arrow to make the group minimize so that we don't have to see all those anymore. Add a new layer above that group but under the bottle. And then go into the color palette and select this first color on the second row. And in the brushes menu, go back to our monoline brush at about 40 to 50% still. And we are going to draw an oval. Hold your pen down so that it snaps to the screen. And we're most likely going to have to edit it, so click edit shape on the top and then drag the corners till it looks pretty straight and till the corners of the oval just about hit the sides of the bottle, but don't go outside of the bottle, and then fill that shape in. We do want it to be pretty skinny. And then let's go back to the layers menu, add a new layer, drag it underneath this oval that we just made, and using the same color and same brush, we're just going to lightly draw a shape and connect it underneath the oval. Don't go outside the bottle. If you do, just use your eraser, and then we are going to fill that shape in. Then on the layers menu, click on the N next to that layer and drag it down to about 70% opacity, and then add a new layer on top of it and turn it into a clipping mask. On the color palette, grab the second color on the second row and then go back to our 2B charcoal at about 45 to 50%, and we are just going to lightly add some shadow to the water on the bottom right here, kind of curve as you shade so that it kind of matches the bottle shape. Then while on that same layer, we are going to go back to the color palette and select the third color on the second row. Same brush, and we're just going to add some highlights up here on the upper left and upper right sections of that water. And then go onto the oval shape, add a new layer on top of that, turn it into a clipping mask, and then with that same really light color that we just used, we're going to do the same on the oval, just add some highlights to it. Then back on the color palette, grab that second color on the second row, again the darker one, and just add some kind of streaks through the water as well in some sections to give us some more definition. Awesome. The last thing we're going to do is add a really light gray color to the top part of the bottle to make it look like glass. So let's go into our layers menu, add a new layer on top of this water part that we just made, the bigger shape, but underneath the little oval, and then go into our color palette and select this last color on the second row. Go find our monoline brush again, and just like we did with that big water part, we're just going to kind of trace the outline of our bottle, making sure not to go outside it, and then draw it along where we drew our cork in front of the cork, and then behind the oval, and then fill that shape in. And on the layers menu, click the N here and drag the opacity down to 10-15%, somewhere in there, so that you can just barely see it. Awesome. So the next thing we're going to do is make the octopus. It is the hardest part of this, but I promise you can do it. Just take your time and it will turn out amazing. So let's go back into our layers menu, find that group with the corks on it, and add a new layer above it. Go to our color palette and select the first color on the second row, and we are still on our monoline brush at about 40 to 50%. And the first step is to just draw a perfect circle. So draw a circle, touch your finger to the screen, and we want it to be mostly in the middle of the water with a good amount above and below to draw our tentacles. So make it a little smaller if you need to. We can always resize the head later, but this will be our starting point. Fill that in, and then go back into our layers menu, add a new layer on top of this layer, drag it below it. And this is going to be our first layer of tentacles. We're going to have 3 different layers, each with 2 on them. And the first one we're going to just draw off the left here, starting about halfway through the octopus's head. I had this one kind of go up and around, then we're just going to draw a little curve at the tip of the tentacle where it turns back around and it's kind of skinnier there. Draw another curve to connect it to the head and then fill it in. But we definitely want it to be thicker where it comes towards the head, so I'm going to add some strokes there. The key here is to do really quick shapes when you make the original lines for the tentacles. Draw really quickly and that'll help your lines be really smooth. And so it doesn't matter if you have to keep redoing it. And then we're going to draw one on the right side here, starting about halfway as well. And this one I'm going to draw a little differently, more of like a like S shape. And then again, draw the little tip of it and then make it thicker when it comes closer to the head of the octopus, and then fill it in. So make sure you connect your shapes near the head so that you can fill them in as we go. And then we're going to add a new layer on top of that, and this is going to be our second set of tentacles, one on each side again. And they're going to be a little bit more in front, so they're going to start a little further down on the head. So again, this one I'll do like a little S shape, and then draw the little curve towards the end so that it can turn back around, and then draw another shape there, connect it towards the head and fill it in. Okay, and then this next one on the right, I'm going to actually start in the water because I want to make like a really big swirly shape like this, but then I'll connect it here underneath so that it's a little bit lower on the body than the ones behind it. And then again, connect it and fill that in. And then we're going to add a new layer above these ones, and these are going to be our frontmost tentacles, and they're probably going to have to overlap these other ones. So this one will make a little squiggly shape, but it'll kind of overlap that one behind it. And then this last one over here, we'll kind of make a little curly shape in front of the 2 behind it as well, and then connect on the bottom. So then towards the bottom, you should be able to see like a little V where the 2 front tentacles come together underneath the head of the octopus. But again, that's why we drew them on separate layers, so that we can add shading in all of them separately. And the key here is just that you want to make sure that you use really fast lines, and then make sure that at the end they all kind of look the same, like they'd be the same length and the same thickness. And make sure to just go through and smooth them out a little if you need to at the end, but take your time doing this. And then I reshaped the head just a little bit. I could make it a little bit bigger, so I did that. When you have your tentacles looking good, we are going to move on to some shadows and highlights. So go into the layers menu, find the bottommost layer of tentacles, add a new layer on top, turn it into a clipping mask. Go into the color palette and select this second color on the last row, and then go back to our 2B charcoal brush. And we are just going to add some shadows right where it meets the octopus's head to add some depth there. And then we are going to add a new layer on top of the next set of tentacles, turn it into a clipping mask, and do the same thing, and continue on. We want to make sure it's really dark near the head, so push down a little bit harder there. We are also going to add some shadows where the tentacles overlap each other. So on the one behind it, we'll add some shadows there where the one in front of it is, would be creating a shadow on it. So then lastly, back to our layers menu, we're going to add a new layer on top of the front set of tentacles, turn it into a clipping mask, and do the same thing. Okay, next up are the highlights. So let's go back to our layers menu, find that first clipping mask we made on the back tentacles, go into the color palette and select the third color on the third row. And we are just going to add some highlights to the ends of the tentacles to give them some highlights there. And then go back into your layers menu, find the next clipping mask and do the same thing on the second set of tentacles and then again on the third. And then we're actually going to do the same thing to the head. So find the head on the layers menu, add a new layer above it, turn it into a clipping mask. And since we already have this highlight color selected, let's add the highlight on the upper left and then go and grab that darker color, the second one on the last row, and add some shadows to the bottom right of the head. Okay, looking good so far. Go ahead and go back and add some more shadows near the head on the tentacles if you need to make them stand out a little more. The next thing we're going to do is add the little suction cup thingies below the tentacle layers. So find the very last tentacle layer that you have, the ones on the very back, and we are going to add a new layer. Drag that layer behind it, make sure it's not snapping into a clipping mask. If it is, turn that off. But we want to be behind it. Go into the color palette and select the fourth color on the last row, and then go back to our monoline brush. We have it about 40 to 50% still, and we are just going to draw some little oval shapes, and we're going to have them go partially behind the tentacle and just kind of peek out from behind it like this. As you get closer to the head, we're going to make them a little bit bigger, and then when they're closer to the tip of the tentacle, we're going to make them a little bit smaller. I'm not sure what the scientific name of these are, but we are just going to call them the little suction cup thingies. So we are going to do this on each tentacle. So each time just make a new layer below the main tentacle layer. Again, make sure it doesn't automatically turn into a clipping mask. And just keep on going. This is another reason why it was very important to have all of our tentacles on different layers, because these ones in the front that are overlapping, we wouldn't be able to create these the same way. So go ahead and take your time doing that, and then we will continue. Okay, that was my very favorite part. Now we are going to move on. The next thing we're going to do is draw the little dots, the little colorful dots on the octopus. So we are going to find each clipping mask, and that is what we're going to draw these on. So we are going to find the first clipping mask that's on this very back layer of tentacles, go into our color palette and select the last color on the last row. This is like teal color, and using the monoline brush, we are going to just draw some spots, some bigger, some smaller. You don't have to hold down the pen to make them snap to a certain shape. Just kind of draw them, and they should be pretty circular just by themselves. And we are doing this on the clipping mask because we don't want all the shadows on top of them. So we are kind of covering up some of the shadows that we drew on the clipping mask already, but that is okay. I don't go all the way up on the tentacle, but you can if you want to. I'm just kind of focusing on the very ends. But again, just find each new clipping mask each time you're ready to move on to the next set of tentacles and do the same thing. Okay, and lastly, we're going to do the same thing to the head. So find the clipping mask for the head. And again, I'm just going to really focus on the top area of the head here. And I'm going to kind of draw them in more of a circular shape, going around like the left and right side, about halfway down. So that leaves room for our eyes to kind of have their focus. Speaking of eyes, that's the next step. So in the layers menu, add a new layer on top of this clipping mask that we were just working on. You don't have to turn it into a clipping mask. Go into the layers menu and select this yellow color, the fifth one on this last row. And then we are going to draw a circular shape. Make sure to touch your screen down and then also fill it in and kind of adjust the placement of it. But we're going to make a duplicate of it on the layers menu. And then click the arrow and then make sure your snapping and magnetics are turned on so that you can just drag it straight across and have them stay in line. And then go to the layers menu and pinch those two layers together with your finger. And then you can move them around a little if you need to get them in the right spot. Make a duplicate of that layer and then select the bottom one of those duplicates and then click on the wand tool, click Gaussian blur, and drag that up to about 7-8%. Okay, next we're going to add some streaks to the bottle to make it look like glass. So go into our layers menu, add a new layer on top of everything. And then in the color palette, we're going to use this fourth color on the second row here. And we're going to go into our pen tool and we're first going to make some bubbles. So let's go to our monoline brush again. And we are just going to make some bubbles, and I like to make them bigger when it's closer to the octopus and then smaller as it gets further away. And we're just going to make a few little sections of them kind of going up towards the top of the water. Let's add another one here. Okay, awesome. On that same layer, we're going to add the streaks. So we're just going to change our pen tool. In that same calligraphy menu, we're going to use this water pen. And we are going to set it to about 30%. And we are just going to draw a little streak over here with a little tail on it. And then the same thing on the left side here, just kind of following the curve of the glass a little bit. And pretty close to the edge. Okay, awesome. The very last step is to add the shadow underneath the bulb. So we are going to go into our layers menu, go all the way to the bottom, add a new layer, drag it below the cork layer so it's right above the background. And we are going to go into the color palette and select this last color on the second row, this grayish color. And then we are going to grab the selection tool here and turn it on ellipse and turn it on color fill. And we are just going to drag a little oval underneath the bottle here. And when you let go of your pen, the gray color will fill in automatically. And, you can adjust the size if you need to, but when you like it, and, we'll drag it up a little bit, and then click on the wand, click Gaussian blur, layer, drag that to about 20 to 25% to give it a nice glow around the edge, and then we are going to click on the layers menu, click on the N, and drag the opacity down to about 60 to 70% there. And that is the end of our drawing. I hope you had fun. If you did, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more tutorials in the future. And if you want to post your finished drawing on Instagram, please do so and tag me in it so that I can see how it turned out. While you're there, go ahead and give me a follow so that you can see what I'm working on next. Thanks so much for watching!